Ladies and gentlemen, there is a strength that is not born of muscle nor circumstance. It is released when a man leans on God. In every situation, wisdom is the principal thing. The ability to see as God sees and respond by the Spirit. When pressure rises, ask for strength to stand, to remain aligned, to obey. When confusion speaks, ask for wisdom to discern seasons, people, and instructions. Grace is supplied to the humble, power flows to dependence, and light breaks forth when prayer becomes your first response. Strength is released through total dependence on God, and this truth stands at the center of spiritual life because no man is truly powerful until he knows the source of power. Many attempt to survive by willpower, intelligence, connections, or experience, but there comes a point where the limitations of the human frame are exposed. At that point, dependence is no longer a theory, it becomes a necessity. God never designed man to be self-sufficient. He designed man to draw. Just as a branch has no life outside the vine, so a believer has no strength outside divine supply. The illusion of strength is often sustained by seasons of ease, but adversity reveals the real foundations of a man's confidence. Dependence on God is not weakness, it is alignment. It is the recognition that heaven holds the resources required for earthly victory. When a man kneels in prayer, he is not bowing to defeat, he is positioning himself for reinforcement. Spiritual strength is not stored like physical energy. It is supplied daily, sometimes moment by moment, as the heart remains yielded. This is why those who walk closely with God appear resilient even when circumstances are harsh. Their stability is not rooted in predictability but in presence. They know where to run when answers fail and when emotions fluctuate. Many confuse activity with strength, yet strength is measured by the ability to stand, to remain consistent, to endure without losing clarity or character. Dependence teaches restraint. It teaches a man to wait for instructions rather than rush into reaction. In waiting, strength is renewed. In silence, clarity is formed. In surrender, divine energy begins to flow. God does not empower pride, He empowers trust. Every time a believer acknowledges God as the source, channels open in the spirit that allow grace to flow without obstruction. True dependence begins with understanding limitations. When a man accepts that he does not know everything, cannot control everything, and cannot fix everything, he becomes qualified to receive help. Heaven responds quickly to humility. Strength is multiplied when self-reliance is laid down. This is why prayer is central to spiritual strength, because prayer is the language of dependence. It is a confession that without God's intervention, progress will be temporary and victory will be fragile. In seasons of pressure, dependence becomes a lifestyle rather than an event. Decisions are brought before God. Reactions are filtered through the Spirit. Emotions are submitted for regulation. This posture keeps the heart guarded from burnout and frustration. Many grow weary, not because the assignment is heavy, but because they are carrying it alone. God never intended His people to carry spiritual responsibilities with human strength. Divine assignments require divine energy, and that energy is accessed only through reliance on Him. Dependence also produces sensitivity. When strength flows from God, discernment increases. A dependent believer learns to recognize when to move and when to pause, when to speak and when to remain quiet. This sensitivity preserves strength. Wasted battles drain energy, but instructed actions conserve it. God often saves strength by giving direction before engagement. Those who depend on Him learn the value of obedience over effort, alignment over struggle. There is also a refining dimension to dependence. As a man leans on God, unnecessary confidence in flesh is stripped away. The heart becomes teachable. Correction is received without resistance. Growth accelerates because pride no longer blocks instruction. Strength matures in such an environment. It is no longer loud or aggressive, but calm, rooted and enduring. This kind of strength does not panic when outcomes delay, because it trusts the timing of God. In spiritual warfare, dependence is not optional. The battles of life are often beyond intellect and strategy. There are forces that cannot be confronted with arguments or experience. Only divine backing guarantees victory. When a believer depends on God, he fights from a position of authority rather than desperation. He understands that power flows from alignment with heaven's will. This confidence stabilizes the mind and anchors faith even when the terrain is unfamiliar. Dependence also reshapes perspective. Instead of asking how strong am I, the dependent heart asks how faithful is God. This shift changes everything. Fear loses its grip. Anxiety weakens. The pressure to prove oneself fades. Life becomes a journey of trust rather than performance. Strength becomes consistent because it is not tied to moods or outcomes. It flows from relationship, and relationship sustains what effort cannot. Those who depend on God develop endurance. They learn to last. They are not easily offended, easily distracted, or easily discouraged. Their strength is renewed because it is drawn from an eternal source. Even when they stumble, they rise with humility, knowing restoration is part of divine supply. Dependence teaches recovery. It teaches how to return to alignment quickly, without shame or delay. In leadership, ministry, family, and personal growth, dependence on God keeps the heart pure. It removes the temptation to manipulate results. It produces integrity, because outcomes are trusted to God rather than forced by human schemes. Strength flows in such purity. God backs those who rely on Him because their victories reflect His glory, not their ego. This is why dependence is rewarded with increase, influence, and stability. As days unfold and seasons change, the one who has learned dependence remains anchored. When doors open, gratitude guards the heart. When doors close, trust preserves peace. Strength continues to flow because the source remains constant. The dependent believer understands that God does not merely give strength. He becomes strength present in decisions, present in weakness, present in waiting, present in movement, present in uncertainty, present in clarity, present in silence, present in action, present in every breath that carries purpose forward. Wisdom gives direction in every season of life, and without it, strength can be wasted. Effort can become noise and movement can lead to confusion. Life is seasonal by divine design, and each season demands a different response. What worked yesterday may not work today, and what succeeds today may be dangerous tomorrow. Wisdom is the ability to interpret seasons accurately and respond in alignment with God's mind. It is not merely information or intelligence. It is insight inspired by God that guides decisions, relationships, timing, and priorities. Many fail not because they lack strength or opportunity, but because they move without wisdom. Wisdom preserves destiny. It teaches a man when to advance and when to retreat, when to speak and when silence is the safest language. There are moments when action is required and moments when patience is the highest form of obedience. Without wisdom, a person can mistake motion for progress and urgency for purpose. Wisdom introduces order into life. It arranges efforts so that energy is invested where it matters most. It prevents unnecessary battles and protects the heart from avoidable wounds. Every season carries a lesson, and wisdom is the tool that decodes it. In seasons of increase, wisdom teaches stewardship. In seasons of delay, Wisdom teaches endurance. In seasons of exposure, wisdom teaches humility. In seasons of silence, wisdom teaches trust. Those who lack wisdom often misinterpret seasons and respond emotionally rather than spiritually. They celebrate too early, complain too loudly, or quit too quickly. Wisdom stabilizes the soul and anchors decisions beyond feelings. Divine wisdom begins with the fear of God, a deep reverence that places God's opinion above personal logic. When a man honors God, wisdom flows easily into a yielded heart. Pride resists wisdom because pride assumes it already knows. Humility attracts wisdom because humility acknowledges the need for guidance. This is why prayer is essential to wisdom. In prayer, a believer admits that human perspective is limited and invites divine perspective into earthly matters. Wisdom also governs relationships. Not every connection is meant for every season. Some people are destiny helpers. Others are destiny lessons. Wisdom discerns who to walk with, who to learn from, and who to love from a distance. Many destinies have been delayed or damaged by the absence of relational wisdom. Emotional attachment without discernment can open doors to distraction. Wisdom protects focus and preserves purpose by aligning relationships with assignment. In decision-making, wisdom provides clarity under pressure. Life often demands choices when information is incomplete and time is limited. Wisdom steps in to guide the heart beyond what the eyes can see. It helps a man choose peace over panic, obedience over convenience, and long-term purpose over short-term pleasure. Wisdom understands consequences. It weighs outcomes before actions. It teaches that every decision is a seed, and every seed produces a harvest. Wisdom also teaches timing. Knowing what to do is important, but knowing when to do it is critical. A correct action at the wrong time can be as harmful as a wrong action. Wisdom waits for alignment. It recognizes divine windows and understands that delay is not always denial. Many opportunities are lost because of haste. Wisdom trains the heart to wait for God's signal before moving, ensuring that effort is supported by grace. In seasons of adversity, wisdom gives perspective. It prevents bitterness by revealing purpose. Instead of asking why, wisdom teaches the heart to ask what must be learned. Trials become classrooms rather than prisons. Wisdom extracts value from pain and transforms pressure into preparation. Those who lack wisdom often grow resentful in hardship, but those who possess it grow refined. Wisdom reminds the believer that God is not absent in difficulty, but intentional. Wisdom also guards speech. Words have power, and wisdom teaches restraint. Not every truth must be spoken, and not every emotion must be expressed. Wisdom understands the weight of words and the timing of communication. It knows when silence preserves dignity and when speech brings healing. Many conflicts escalate not because of wrong intentions, but because of unwise words. Wisdom protects relationships by guiding expression. In leadership and responsibility, wisdom sustains influence. Authority without wisdom leads to control, but authority guided by wisdom produces impact. Wisdom teaches leaders to listen, to learn, and to discern motives beyond actions. It helps manage people with grace rather than force. Wisdom recognizes that people are not projects but souls. It balances firmness with compassion, vision with patience. Wisdom is also progressive. It grows with obedience. Each time a believer responds correctly to divine instruction, capacity increases. Wisdom builds upon itself. Disobedience dulls spiritual perception, but obedience sharpens it. This is why consistent fellowship with God is essential. The more a man walks with God, the more fluent he becomes in recognizing his voice. Wisdom becomes instinctive, guiding thoughts, reactions, and decisions effortlessly. In times of success, wisdom preserves humility. It reminds the heart of the source of elevation. It protects against pride and complacency. Wisdom teaches gratitude and generosity. It understands that success is a responsibility, not a license. Without wisdom, success can destroy character. With wisdom, success becomes a platform for impact and service. Wisdom also prepares a man for transitions. Life is filled with changes, and wisdom helps navigate them without losing identity or direction. It teaches how to let go without bitterness and how to embrace new seasons without fear. Wisdom stabilizes the heart during change by anchoring it in eternal truth rather than temporary conditions. Those who pursue wisdom value instruction. They are not offended by correction. They understand that rebuke is protection and guidance is preservation. Wisdom turns correction into acceleration. Instead of resisting feedback, the wise receive it as an investment. This posture shortens learning curves and prevents costly mistakes. Wisdom ultimately aligns a man with God's purpose. It ensures that life is not merely busy, but meaningful. It directs energy toward what matters eternally. It keeps the heart aligned even when the path is unclear. Wisdom walks by light, not noise by truth, not pressure by instruction, not impulse, guiding each step with clarity, guiding the soul with understanding, shaping decisions with insight, leading the heart steadily through uncertainty, through growth, through waiting, through action, through silence, through seasons yet to unfold. Prayer activates divine grace under pressure, and this reality defines how believers survive, grow, and prevail in demanding seasons. Pressure is inevitable in life. It comes through responsibility, opposition, uncertainty, delay, and expectations that stretch the soul. What determines the outcome of pressure is not its intensity but the response to it. Prayer is the spiritual mechanism that converts pressure into power. When a man prays, he is not escaping pressure, he is inviting grace into it. Grace does not always remove the weight, but it supplies the strength to carry it without breaking. Under pressure, human capacity is quickly exhausted. Emotions fluctuate, logic becomes limited, and confidence begins to shake. Prayer stabilizes the inner world before it addresses the external one. It realigns the heart with truth when fear attempts to dominate the mind. In prayer, burdens are transferred. Scripture reveals that grace is sufficient, not because pressure is light, but because divine enablement compensates for human weakness. Prayer becomes the exchange point where weakness meets divine sufficiency. Grace is not automatic, it is accessed. Many desire grace but avoid prayer. Yet prayer is the channel through which grace flows freely. When pressure rises, prayer deepens spiritual sensitivity. It allows the believer to hear divine instructions that are often missed in haste or panic. God frequently responds to pressure, not by changing circumstances immediately, but by releasing insight, peace, and direction that empowers endurance. Prayer trains the heart to listen before reacting, and this posture preserves strength. Under pressure, prayer also purifies motives. When situations squeeze the heart, hidden intentions surface. Prayer exposes these intentions before God, allowing alignment and correction. Grace flows best through a sincere heart. Prayer removes the need to perform or impress, bringing the believer into honest dependence. This honesty invites mercy, and mercy sustains the soul when perfection is impossible. In prayer, the believer learns that God is not intimidated by weakness, but he responds to surrender. Prayer shifts perspective. Pressure often magnifies problems until they appear larger than God. Prayer restores spiritual vision, reminding the heart of God's sovereignty and faithfulness. When a man prays, he steps into a higher viewpoint where circumstances are seen through eternal lenses. This perspective does not deny reality, but it redefines it. Fear loses its authority when prayer lifts the mind above the noise of urgency and doubt. Grace under pressure also manifests as peace, not the absence of trouble, but the presence of calm within trouble. Prayer releases this peace by anchoring the heart in God's presence. Peace becomes a guard, protecting thoughts from anxiety and despair. This guarding function is critical because pressure often attacks the mind first. Prayer shields the mind, keeping it from spiraling into conclusions that are not rooted in truth. Prayer also invites divine intervention. Some pressures are beyond strategy and effort. They require God's direct involvement. In prayer, the believer acknowledges the limits of human ability and invites God's hand into the situation. This invitation releases supernatural possibilities. Doors open, help arises, resistance weakens, and timing aligns. Even when outcomes delay, prayer sustains hope and prevents discouragement from taking root. Under sustained pressure, prayer becomes a rhythm rather than an emergency response. It shapes daily life. Decisions are prayed through, reactions are prayed through, emotions are prayed through. This consistency builds spiritual resilience. Grace flows steadily rather than sporadically. The believer becomes less reactive and more anchored. Pressure no longer dictates behavior. Prayer does. Prayer also sharpens discernment under pressure. Not every opportunity is from God, and not every battle must be fought. Pressure can push people into unnecessary actions. Prayer filters options and reveals priorities. It helps the believer distinguish between distractions and assignments. This discernment preserves energy and focus. Grace flows where obedience aligns with God's will. In seasons of opposition, prayer releases boldness. Fear often accompanies pressure, but prayer replaces fear with confidence rooted in God's authority. This confidence is not arrogance, it is assurance. It allows the believer to stand firm without hostility, to speak truths without aggression, and to endure resistance without compromise. Grace empowers courage that is calm and unwavering. Prayer also sustains character under pressure. Many lose integrity when stress increases. Prayer keeps the heart aligned with righteousness even when shortcuts seem attractive. Grace empowers obedience when it is costly. It strengthens resolve to choose what is right over what is easy. This moral strength preserves long-term destiny. Pressure tests character, but prayer fortifies it. Prayer invites comfort. Under pressure, emotional exhaustion is common. Prayer becomes a place of rest. God's presence restores the soul. Tears become language. Silence becomes communion. Grace flows as reassurance that the believer is not alone. This comfort renews emotional capacity, enabling continued faithfulness without burnout. Prayer also releases endurance. Some pressures do not lift quickly. They require patience. Prayer renews strength to wait without frustration. Grace teaches the heart to trust God's timing. Endurance is not passive. It is active trust sustained by grace. Prayer fuels this trust daily, preventing weariness from turning into despair. In corporate settings, prayer multiplies grace. When believers pray together under pressure, unity strengthens and burdens are shared. Collective prayer releases collective grace. This shared strength creates stability and momentum. Pressure that could isolate instead unites. Prayer transforms struggle into fellowship and resilience. Prayer also prepares the believer for future pressures. Each prayerful response builds spiritual capacity. Grace increases. Faith matures. The believer becomes seasoned, not hardened. Past victories in prayer become testimonies that fuel confidence in new challenges. Pressure no longer intimidates. It activates remembrance of God's faithfulness. Grace under pressure often manifests as wisdom to navigate complexity. Prayer opens access to divine strategies that simplify what appears overwhelming. God often provides step-by-step guidance rather than complete answers. Prayer teaches contentment with daily bread rather than full control. This dependence keeps the heart aligned and peaceful. Prayer ultimately keeps the believer rooted in relationship. Pressure can distract from intimacy with God, but prayer restores focus. Grace flows most freely in relationship, not ritual. Prayer deepens trust, reinforces identity, and reminds the believer that value is not defined by performance, but by belonging. This identity stabilizes the soul when outcomes are uncertain. As pressure continues to arise in different forms, prayer remains the consistent response that activates grace. It becomes the place where fear dissolves, strength is renewed, wisdom is released, peace is restored, courage is awakened, endurance is supplied, discernment is sharpened, comfort is received. And faith is sustained, carrying the believer forward with stability, clarity, confidence, and quiet strength under every weight that life presents. Obedience sustains victory in difficult situations because victory that is not sustained becomes a lesson rather than a testimony. Many people desire breakthrough, but few understand that what keeps victory alive is not excitement, strength, or even faith alone. It is consistent obedience to divine instruction. God does not only give victories, He gives instructions that preserve them. In difficult situations, obedience becomes the language of trust. It is easy to obey when outcomes are predictable, but true obedience is revealed when understanding is limited and pressure is high. Obedience aligns a man with divine order. God's power flows through order, not emotion. When a believer obeys, he positions himself within the framework where grace operates freely. Disobedience may appear attractive in moments of pressure, especially when shortcuts promise quick relief, but shortcuts always compromise sustainability. What obedience builds slowly, disobedience destroys suddenly. This is why many experience temporary success followed by collapse. Victory came, but obedience did not follow. In difficult situations, emotions often demand control. Fear urges retreat. Anger demands reaction. Impatience pushes haste. Obedience quiets the noise of emotion and submits the heart to divine authority. It teaches the believer to respond to instruction rather than impulse. God often speaks calmly in the midst of chaos, and obedience requires sensitivity to hear and courage to comply. The power of obedience is not in how dramatic it appears, but in how precisely it aligns with God's will. Obedience also protects the heart from pride after victory. When God brings a breakthrough, the temptation to take credit increases. Obedience keeps the heart humble, reminding the believer that success is sustained by continued alignment, not past miracles. Yesterday's obedience does not guarantee today's preservation. Daily obedience is required to maintain divine backing. This posture keeps the believer dependent rather than complacent. In warfare seasons, obedience determines authority. Spiritual authority is not a function of loud declarations, but of submission to God's commands. The believer who obeys carries quiet confidence because heaven stands behind his actions. Disobedience weakens authority, even if words sound powerful. Victory in difficult situations is often less about confrontation and more about compliance with God's strategy. Some battles are won by silence, some by movement, some by waiting, some by speaking, and only obedience discerns the difference. Obedience refines character under pressure. Difficult situations reveal what truly governs the heart. When obedience is chosen despite discomfort, character is strengthened, integrity is preserved, trust is deepened. God values obedience because it demonstrates loyalty beyond convenience. This loyalty invites continued favor. God entrusts greater responsibilities to those who obey consistently, not occasionally. Obedience also sustains peace. Many lose peace not because the situation is impossible, but because they are resisting God's instruction. Inner conflict often signals misalignment. When obedience is restored, peace follows, even if circumstances remain challenging. This peace becomes strength. It guards the mind from anxiety and stabilizes emotions during uncertainty. Obedience removes internal friction, allowing grace to flow unhindered. In difficult situations, obedience sometimes requires letting go. Letting go of control, expectations, relationships, or familiar patterns. God often demands surrender before expansion. Obedience in letting go feels like loss initially, but it creates space for divine replacement. Many victories are delayed because hands are full of what God has asked to release. Obedience opens the hands and prepares the heart for new dimensions. Obedience also sharpens discernment. As a believer obeys, spiritual perception increases. The heart becomes more sensitive to God's voice. Instructions become clearer. Confusion reduces. This clarity is essential in difficult situations where multiple voices compete for attention. Obedience filters noise and amplifies truth. It trains the heart to recognize God's leading quickly and accurately. Delayed obedience weakens outcomes. Partial obedience produces partial results. God honors obedience that is complete and timely. Difficult situations often demand immediate alignment. Hesitation can complicate what obedience would have resolved. This is why obedience requires courage. It may attract misunderstanding, criticism, or isolation, but it preserves divine approval. God's approval outweighs public opinion. Obedience sustains victory by establishing spiritual consistency. Consistency keeps doors open. Many doors close not because of opposition, but because obedience was abandoned after entry. God watches how believers handle access. Obedience proves readiness for longevity. It shows that the believer values God's will above personal comfort. This posture attracts trust from heaven. In leadership, obedience protects influence. Leaders who obey God remain credible. Their authority is rooted in alignment, not position. In difficult seasons, people look for stability. Obedient leaders provide it because they are anchored beyond circumstances. Their decisions are guided by instruction rather than pressure. This steadiness sustains collective victory. Obedience also teaches patience. God's instructions often involve processes. Difficult situations tempt believers to rush outcomes. Obedience embraces process, trusting that timing is as important as action. Rushed victories collapse easily. Processed victories endure. Obedience keeps the believer within God's timing, where protection and provision coexist. In moments when God's instruction contradicts logic, obedience becomes an act of faith. Faith is not merely believing in outcomes. It is trusting God's wisdom above personal reasoning. This trust invites supernatural intervention. God often confirms obedience with results that logic cannot explain. These confirmations strengthen faith and reinforce commitment to obedience. Obedience also preserves spiritual sensitivity after victory. Success can dull hearing if vigilance is lost. Continued obedience keeps the heart alert. It prevents drift. Drift is subtle, gradual, and dangerous. Obedience anchors the believer daily, keeping alignment intact even when life becomes comfortable. In personal growth, obedience sustains discipline. Growth requires consistency in prayer, study, integrity, and humility. Difficult situations expose weaknesses, but obedience transforms exposure into growth. Instead of retreating, the obedient believer adjusts according to instruction. This adaptability sustains momentum. Obedience ultimately reflects love for God. It is not driven by fear, but by relationship. Jesus revealed that love is expressed through obedience. In difficult situations, this love becomes visible. It chooses God even when outcomes are uncertain. This choice attracts divine presence. God draws near to those who honor him through obedience. Victory that is sustained becomes testimony. Testimony glorifies God and strengthens others. Obedience ensures that victory remains pure, aligned, and impactful. It guards against regret and preserves joy. In every difficult situation, obedience stands as the quiet force that holds everything together, guiding steps, preserving favor, maintaining peace, protecting purpose, strengthening faith, refining character, aligning destiny, and keeping the believer within the flow of divine will, where victory remains alive and active regardless of the season or the pressure faced.